Hello, welcome everyone to the final year series on top tips in ranking and selecting your foundation program. So today we're very happy to have Dr. Charlie Picton, who's currently an F1 in the South Thames, South London Foundation School. I'll let him take on the stage, and I think the session would be fairly informal with some Q&A at the end, but I will let Dr. Picton introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Dennis. Hi, my name is Charlie. I am an F1 at Lewisham at the moment in South London. My qualifications for doing this teaching session are purely that I did the same process last year, so quite familiar with it. And hopefully I can give you some helpful tips along the way. I'm going to try and keep it quite snappy and not too long, because I think there's only so long we can talk about this before everyone falls asleep. So let's get started. So in terms of what we will talk about in this, if anyone's got any questions along the way, feel free to put them on the chat and I can answer them all at the end. So covered in this talk, we'll talk about the timeline a bit, processes of applying to different deaneries, and then factors I think you should be thinking about when you're ranking jobs, and then tips and advice kind of at each stage along the way. So the timeline. Some of you will have sat your SJT now. Some of you will have it coming up. Unfortunately, when you'll be applying, you won't know your scores. When it comes to a specialist foundation program, that is kind of its own talk and kind of a separate process. So I'm not really going to cover that today. It's a really great opportunity if you get onto it. If you don't and you go through the normal route, there's always ways you can sort of make up these points. But it's just something to be aware of. So coming up on the 16th of February, you will have to lock in your deanery preferences. And as I said, unfortunately, you won't know your score before you do. So it's a bit nerve-wracking and it's quite a stressful time. After the 16th of February, you have to wait a little while until the 9th of March. And that is when you'll find out your SAT score and which deanery you have gone into. Then a quite hectic process starts happening where you have to start ranking jobs, deaneries or sub-deaneries or trusts. Once you know which deanery you're in, you can check on that deanery's website or that foundation school's website to see where you rank within that deanery. And then you can start having a bit of idea of where you're going to be. This is especially a stressful time if you've got finals around now, which is what happened to me last year. But this process is worth spending some time on because it's obviously going to be dictating where you go for the next 2 years. So depending on which deanery you're in, it'll be a 1-stage or 2-stage process. I'm going to talk about South Thames because that's where I applied and it's just easiest for me to sort of talk through in the process. And I'm not trying to focus it more on London than anywhere else. So we, on the 9th of March, found out we were going to South Thames, and then there was 5 different areas within South Thames that you could then apply to. And you knew roughly where you would get a decile within that deanery. So I knew whereabouts I was, and the deanery will give you information on how competitive each sort of sub area is. So you can do some research and work out roughly where you're going to be. In other foundation schools, such as Northwest, which covers sort of Manchester and Liverpool, you apply to trusts individually, and then you will get into there and then rank jobs for them. So the advantages of this is you have to rank a lot less jobs. I had to rank 170 versus other areas. I think Scotland might be one. I don't know off the top of my head. There you will just get into that deanery and you'll have to rank every single job within it, which can be up to something crazy like 900 jobs. So it's something to be aware of that'll save you some time. If you do get into a deanery where there's no sub-preferencing and you're going to have to rank every single job, you can look at where you're lying in that deanery. So if you've come top decile, you know you're going to get in the top 10% of jobs. So you don't have to bother ranking the very bottom ones. If you come lower down, unfortunately, you're going to have to read through quite carefully, and we'll go on to a bit more talking about that process as well. So this is just a screenshot of the oral interface because I can't get back on it anymore, and it's changed, or it will change once you get in. So here's where you're ranking your deaneries. And we'll talk about sort of competitiveness of each deanery as well. So once you get your scores on the 9th of March, this will change from deaneries to either all the jobs, something like could be 900, to different trusts or to sub-deaneries. And then you just select them. When it's a one-stage, two-stage process, you can sort of work out how you're getting on. This is probably the most important point of this talk, and it's the best tip I can really give you. In terms of how jobs are allocated, each candidate is ranked from top to bottom, and then you're just assigned the next, when it comes to your turn, you're just assigned the next available job. So whoever does number one in that area will get their number one choice. If you're in the bang in the middle, it'll just look at your options and it'll just select the next one that isn't available. So there's no disadvantage in putting a competitive job top. You're not going to be penalized for it. And again, there's no advantage in putting jobs that you think will be less desirable top, because you're not you're not preferenced for ranking those higher. And it's worth saying that people want very different things. So you'd be surprised how many people end up getting their top track or getting their top deanery. I appreciate it's a really, really stressful time at the moment, but actually the vast majority of people get their first or second deanery. I couldn't find the statistics online, but it's a really high percentage, and you're going to have a good chance wherever you go. This is roughly the competitiveness of the deaneries. It's based off the 2020 scores, which it changed a lot last year because everyone's SAT scores went up. And it will change again this year because of you're not getting the extra points for publications or for anything else or other degrees, which basically means it all comes down to the SJT. So if you haven't got a great decile, I wouldn't really put that off applying somewhere competitive, because you could just smash the SAT and still get in, because it's now worth much more than 50%. So that's just something to consider. So it's more difficult to predict the scores, but essentially the competitiveness of each deanery stays the same. London is normally the most competitive each year, and other places are less competitive. The only thing to consider if you're going for somewhere more competitive is if you scrape in the bottom area of that deanery. So when I applied for South Thames, with the points I had, I did quite well in the South Thames ranking groups. If I had applied to North London, which is more competitive, I would have been in the bottom decile. So although it might be a more competitive deanery, you have the lowest ranking within that deanery, so you get left preference over jobs. I hope that makes sense. It is a bit complicated. And if I'm going too fast, then just say anything. Yes, I've just had a look at the chat. You can find out which ones deaneries are two-stage versus one-stage. If you go on the UK Foundation Programme Handbook, it will give you, there's a big Excel spreadsheet, and it will talk through all of them. With London, did you? No, so for London, London was split. So I got into South Thames in the first stage, but South Thames included South East London, South West London, Dover, Kent, Surrey, Sussex. So it was a massive area. So it was a big risk applying because you can end up in the middle of nowhere. That was the first stage. And then the second stage was ranking 5 different areas. So I wanted to be in South East London. Does that make sense? I hope so. But essentially, you can find all this information online. Latest competitive deanery series. I couldn't find it for this year. London is different this year. Right, we're going to have to probably come to questions at the end. London is all of one deanery this year, where it was a split last year into North and then South Thames. But we can come back to all the questions at the end, because everyone will fall asleep. So now I'm going to talk about factors that I would consider when you're ranking your jobs. We'll go over location, hospital versus DGH versus teaching, and then jobs and sort of career aspects as well. So in terms of location, you might be moving across the country. I don't know which uni you were at. When I was at Manchester, you could go in 2 days a week and no one cared. It was very chill. Now all of a sudden you're expected to be there 9 to 5 on calls. And it can be really stressful, especially depending on what job you're doing, which we'll talk about as well. So if you're close, I think in terms of location, one of the biggest things to consider is being close to friends and family who will be supporting you. If you're feeling more isolated somewhere else, then you might find that more difficult. City versus more rural. Cities tend to be more popular because there's more young people living there. But, if you like Scotland and if you want to go climbing, then in the countryside, other factors to consider as well. Cost of living is much higher in bigger cities. If you think you're going to be absolutely balling as an F1, you're not, unfortunately. London's really expensive for rent. Manchester is now very expensive as well. And locum rates outside of London are much better. Over Christmas, they tried to ask me to cover New Year's Day and New Year's Eve for £29 an hour. In Bristol, they were offering one of my friends about £70 an hour. So just consider where you're going to be and sort of how much you're going to earn. There is an extra incentive for being in London, but it's not a huge amount. It doesn't really cover the costs either. So DGH versus teaching hospital is a really hotly debated topic. In a teaching hospital, you've got more specialties and more subspecialties. So you're going to see rarer, more interesting cases. And where I work at Lewisham, very often really complex stuff will get whisked away. And a really complex case will end up being in one of the big hospitals in London. So you miss out on sort of some of that exposure. At a district general, generally a bit shabbier. Lewisham is not a pretty hospital, but it's much friendlier from what I've heard. I don't have first-hand experience. But there's a real advantage in once you've worked or done a few on calls, you generally get to know a lot of the registrars. So when you're making referrals, it's much easier because you pick up the phone and it's someone who you've seen after work and you know well. And there's generally a bit more trust. So it feels less formal when you're making referrals, which is really nice. And you get to know everyone quite quickly. The other aspect is responsibility. You're less supported at DGH just because a lot of the time they're busier. There's a bit less hand-holding. And potentially, although less opportunity potentially academically, more opportunity to get stuck in. I don't think that's a right answer. Lots of trusts or foundation schools, and again, you can get this on the UK Foundation Programme Handbook, will tell you whether you'll be at one trust for 1 or 2 years. So I think around Oxford, a lot of the trusts you stay in one place for 2 years. In London, you'll always switch after 1 year, apart from a few tracks. And another thing that's quite interesting to consider, for some reason, Essex and Bristol will let you do F2 in Australia or New Zealand or in places around Europe. Just something to look into. So jobs is another big factor once you've got your deanery. Quieter jobs versus busy jobs is always a good debate. Anything that has medicine on calls is going to be busy. The advantage of that is you get chucked in the deep end and you learn really quickly. At Lewisham, when you're doing medical on calls, you do nights, weekends, and you see an awful lot and you get quite competent quite quickly, which then makes my next rotation, now I'm on to orthopedics, really chill. So the main advantage of having a busy job is you get competent very quickly. But I was also leaving late every day. I never looked at my portfolio because I didn't have time. And the doctor's office is just open on the ward, so you're constantly being battered by family and so on. So there you learn a lot. You're really depended upon, and you're often short-staffed. When you get onto a more chill rotation, so at the moment I'm on orthopedics at Lewisham, which can be quite bad for F1s, but there's a really good ortho Jerry service that basically takes over anyone complicated. At the moment, one person leaves at 3 o'clock every single day because it's really chill. There's not many inpatients. It's really nice. I've done all my portfolio stuff. I'm up to date with all the horrors. All the admin is done. And there's loads of opportunity to go to theatre, to do audits, to do research that I wouldn't have been able to do if I'd had 3 busy medicine jobs. So when you're looking at tracks, I would advise, if you can get a medical job first, I think that's a really good start. And then, give yourself a break, give yourself 1 or 2 chill jobs at some point. If there's a certain specialty you're really interested in, you'll get more seniority when you do it F2. Not so much for medicine jobs, because the F1s and the F2s will have more similarity in what they're doing. But if you want to do orthopedics, if you want to do anesthetics, as an F2, you'll sometimes be able to take referrals and get a bit more stuck in, rather than just being stuck on the wards. So a good mix is generally good advice, because also when it comes to applying for jobs, you're not rewarded for how hard you do at work. You're rewarded for doing audits, presentations, and all the extra stuff on the side. So a nice relaxed time. And if you're thinking of exams that you need to sit, a relaxed job, I'd say is a good thing. The counterbalance to that is if you only, one of my friends has got psych, orthopedics, and then I think sexual health medicine. So no general medicine. And then when he's next year, he'll be in SHO on medicine and might not have a Scooby what's going on. So a balance is always best. Ranking jobs, it took me about a week to go through 170 different tracks. Read every track really carefully. As far as I know, there's no shortcut to this. I don't know of anyone who found one out. So when you click on the track on Oriel, you can then see every single job on that track. You need to be really careful though, because trust doesn't equal hospital. So I know someone who ranked all the jobs at King's College Trust because that's where they just wanted to be central. They didn't really care about what jobs they were doing. But King's College Trust is also connected to the Princess Royal, which is over an hour commute away from London. So next year he's ended up there, outside of London, away from where he wanted to be, not doing jobs he wanted to do. So I don't know of any shortcut, unfortunately. You need to just go through it and read carefully. Only thing is, you can know if you know you've come well in your deanery, then you can discard sort of the lower half. If you rank lower, then unfortunately you do need to go through every job. And I would set aside time for this because it is really laborious and the interface is really tedious as well. So we've come to the end. It seems like I don't know if I'm missing some slides, but there is a bit more to say. So last advice, most people get either first or second choice deanery. So I wouldn't stress about this too much. Also, when it comes to your enjoyment of the job, it really mostly comes down to your attitudes when you're going in. I know people who got into really desirable tracks or really popular places and are having a really shit time. I know people who are in the middle of nowhere having a really good time. The other things you can think of, the priority program, where you're guaranteed a job in a certain area, and sometimes they pay a bit more. People apply for those with the intent of commuting. I don't know if it's too late to do that now, but it's another thing to consider. My best advice once you get into a deanery, if there's a specific hospital you want to work at, you can join the sort of the Mind the Bleak Facebook pages and message people, and they can give you feedback. I applied to Lewisham because my friend is in F2 there now, and he really liked it and recommended it. Messily is a really good website that I will put in the chat in a second, and it gives sort of reviews of or scores for being a junior doctor in different jobs. Junior Doctors UK is a really good website. People can leave reviews for jobs. So I knew at Lewisham that my first job, respiratory, was quite chill, or not chill, but a good job and well supported. The other thing is you can join Mind the Bleak Discord, and you can message people on there, or join the Mind the Bleak team and become a foundation rep, and you'll score points on your portfolio for that. The Mind the Bleak Facebook pages are another good way of just getting in contact with people. If people have got questions about Lewisham Hospital, I'm very happy to answer. I can leave my email behind as well. But that is essentially the process. And we'll go into some questions now. It's quite a brief talk, but I think those are the really important things I would sort of consider.
So while Dr. Picton is looking at the questions in the chat, please fill in feedback form for him, because he's doing this outside his working hours. And we really do generally look at your feedback to improve on our future sessions.
Okay, so less supported than DGH. Do you mean in terms of on-calls having senior support during this? Yes, generally there's a perception that they're not as well staffed, and you're responsible for more patients. So overnight at Lewisham, you're the 1F1 covering, and you don't have to do nights. I just pick them up as locums. You're responsible for about 320 beds, and there's a reg who is down in A&E clerking people. So you're essentially expected to try and sort them out on your own, and then call the reg, obviously, if you can't. But you get a lot of responsibility in sort of managing unwell patients, which you're very much chucked in at the deep end, but that's quickly how you learn a lot. At places like Guy's and St Thomas's, where I am next year, there's a bit more sort of consultant and senior-led support. It can vary, though, from hospital to hospital. So it really just depends where you are. Busy jobs versus quieter jobs. So psych is traditionally quite relaxed, because you're more supernumerary. Intensive care, anaesthetics, again, really good jobs. So this is what I was talking about. If you miss out on, if you're applying for the academic foundation program and you don't get it, if you've got a job like psych, or where I am at the moment, a really nice orthopedics department is really chill, you can get in and do the publications, do audits, do whatever you need for your sort of career. And also, it just means you leave on time all the time. Your weekends off are very nice, and you just leave not thinking about work, so it's quite chill. While ranking rotations, does one still have a chance of getting their top choices of rotation, even if the decile is low? Yeah, generally, for some reason, loads of people I know seem to get their top choice track. The reason being is because people want really different stuff. I really wanted an ENT job at Guy's and St Thomas's next year because it's what I'm interested in. Loads of people who came way lower down in the deciles within that sort of sub-deanery got their top choice, just because people want really different things. So absolutely, just put what you want at the top. And if you don't get it, it's no disadvantage, because you'll just get the next available thing. We're doing such as Wessex and Bristol allow F2s abroad. Is this competitive or open to all? I actually have no idea. You just have to apply once you get into that deanery. But I don't know how many people know about it, because I didn't, until I was doing some research for this talk, I didn't know. So it's definitely worth something worth looking into. Oh, sorry, you've got personal information in the chat. Is there a way to see for ourselves how we rank and do? You need to work it out for yourself. So when you get your SJT score and your academic score, you'll know what you've got. And then you go on that foundation program's website, and that you'll be able to see which decile you're in within that, because it'll give you the top scores down to the bottom and all the breakdown. Your SAT score isn't a whole number, so it'll be to 2 decimal places, and then you add that with your academic score, so you work out exactly what you've got. How long do you have to rank the jobs? Give us the time. So from the 9th of March, if you have everything open, so there's no sub-referencing in the deanery, you have till the 30th of March. If you've got group preferencing, you'll find out your group on the 20th, so you have 10 days. And I had my finals around the same time. So that was extremely stressful, but it's worth making sure you sort of put that effort in. Which jobs will be more busy / chilled? So there's, I talked about this already, but psych, anaesthetics, anything community, so GP is another good one. I'm just trying to think of anything else. Community sexual health. The other thing you can also do is just ask. So orthopedics is normally a horrendous F1 job, because your consultants and reggers and seniors will go to theatre and you're left to sort out the ward on your own. Lewisham just happens to have ortho-gerries and a really good service. So they get a geriatrician who's a consultant and a reg coming around and seeing the patients nearly every day. So you don't really have to do the complicated medicine stuff, and they're responsible for it, which means we don't have many inpatient. So yeah, there's a few that you'll know, and then others you can ask for. Track just means rotation as well, so it's your 6 jobs over the 2 years. Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat at the bottom. If I get absolutely swamped with emails, I might not respond to them all, but I'll try.
You could also email the final year Mind the Beep email. If Dr. Picton didn't get to answer, then I could sometimes channel some questions to him. I think maybe that's the best way. Charles,
yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, so if you could. Yeah, probably better. Yeah. How is the teaching at DGH versus teaching hospital? So there's mandatory F1 teaching that you go to, and it's mind-numbingly boring. It's honestly so terrible, and they just pick really boring topics. But I know from talking to friends at guys in St Thomas's, there's much more dedicated consultant teaching time. I've had a couple of sessions of sort of ad hoc teaching that's organised by sort of reggers or consultants at Lewisham. But I think the advantage you get is because there's less people there, there's less trainees, is you get more stuck in. So although there's less formal teaching, you might get more sort of hands-on experience. Hard to get good research opportunities in DGH. So if you get put in the DGH, I'm at Lewisham at the moment, which is not really a famous publication centre. There's always people who are interested in publishing. So you just ask around the consultants, ask around the reggers. There's always clinical governance leads who are in charge of audits and research, and they're always looking for people to get involved. And sometimes you might be in a department that isn't interested in research. You can just go to another one. I've not had, if anything, I've got too many projects at the moment rather than not enough. There's definitely ways to overcome that. I wouldn't worry about opportunities. But if you're in an academic centre and you've got professors and all of that and the other, it can make the process easier. Specialty entrance exams during FY1 or FY2. It depends what you're applying to. So for surgery, They got rid of the points for sitting MRCS early. So when you apply, you have to sit MSRA now, which is different. So you'd have to sit it in F2. You can't sit it in F1 because it has to be the time you apply. I think it depends how motivated you are. What are your jobs like? So if you've got psych or something really nice where you know you're not going to have on calls and you're going to have dedicated time that you can study, and that's in F1, probably a better time to try and sit it. But there is also an element of you're adjusting to a new job, you're adjusting to working full time. You're going to be much busier than you were as a student. So don't beat yourself up if you're not managing to sit your exams. There's always times to. How does it work regarding ranking your favourite tracks when ranking trusts first? Should you rank trusts based on the track you want or the trust itself? I don't think you can see the tracks before the trust that I'm aware of. I didn't apply to Northwest, so I don't know for sure. For South East Thames, you might be able to if you look really carefully. But I think generally it shouldn't matter too much, because unless there's a really specific job you want, say if you really want to do rheumatology at a tertiary centre and you know that trust offers it, then I would aim for that. But mostly I'd look more at which hospital is going to be like in terms of working, unless that's a really specific specialty you're interested in. Do you recommend choosing based on locations or the rotations? That's a really good question, and it's really difficult, and I think everyone has to come to their own decision. I was more fussed about location, and then kind of ranked jobs afterwards, because I just wanted to live. I wanted to live near my friends. I wanted to live in London, so that was my main priority. But everyone will be different. Also, as an F1 and F2, you're not really getting the same experience you would as a reg for a specialty. So if you're desperate to do cardiothoracic surgery, your experience as an F1 or F2 might be really limited anyway, and you can make that time up elsewhere. How do you know what a competitive job is? In terms of tracks, normally it's location and hospital that just makes them competitive, rather than individual jobs. So if there's a two-stage process, the second stage is where you rank the jobs in the area you've got from the first stage, where you ranked areas from that deanery. Yes, I think so. That's a bit of a tongue twister. So for Lewisham, what is the group? That will be London this year, Pan London. Okay, so just to explain what could happen if we got a low decile, but for example have ranked the most competitive places as your top three. Would put London 7, Brighton rather than London 7, Oxfordshire. No, you don't get any advantage for playing it safe. You'll just be assigned to the deanery that you can get into with that score. So if you put that, you'll just rank wherever your points fit, as far as I know. So there's no, they won't think you're lower down but your score is higher. Essentially, I would just apply where you want to apply, and if you don't get in, you don't get in. But again, it's really going to come down to the SAT. Any factors to consider when considering trying to decide between moving home with family, save money, versus moving to a new city? It's a good question. You will save a lot of money if you're not paying rent, but then it's also more exciting from my perspective to move somewhere new, to live somewhere new, which is what I wanted. But also be conscious that if you're moving really far away from your family, it's going to be a long time to travel back, and you might feel more isolated and less supported. That's not really a right answer. It'll just be something you have to decide. Sort of average rent in London, would you recommend hospital accommodation? I don't think anywhere in London offers hospital accommodation anymore, as far as I know. A lot of the free advantages of being a doctor have gone, unfortunately. Rent's really expensive. And if you are moving somewhere new, start looking for accommodation quite early. My friend was in Cornwall and couldn't find a place for ages, so had to live out our van just because there's less places to rent at the moment. So it's just something to be aware of. Fair to live alone or with housemates if I want. Again, that's really just depends on you. I would hate to live alone. I find it really boring. And the cost is significantly less on rent. But if you'd rather be sort of on your own and have your own space, some people might enjoy that a lot more. What's an average SAT score / points? I think the average a couple of years ago was around 38, 40, but it changes quite a lot every year. And you can kind of predict how you might do based off sort of the practice questions. But again, it's so random, and don't be disheartened if you don't do well in the SAT, because it all just changes every year, and some people just get unlucky with the questions. One of the questions I had was like, your new doctor on the ward really smells. What do you do? Which is just really annoying because this is deciding where you're going to live for 2 years. So I just don't put too much weight into it. Is the 10 extra bonus points for prizes rather than publications this year? Has been completely taken away. As far as I know, you don't get any points for prizes, publications, or anything like that. You just everyone gets 40 points standard, and then 10 points based on your decile, and then 50 points based on the SJT. So the SJT is worth 5 times more than everything you do academically at uni, which is why it's really frustrating. But it also means you don't know what your score is going to be. You might as well aim high. I think that's all the questions so far. Best of luck to everyone. I hope that was helpful and not too short. What are some areas look into for accommodation and wants to avoid someone new to the city? Oh God, I have no idea. You'll just have to ask anyone, friends who are living there. I just use Rightmove. Yeah, I also don't get too stressed around this. Really how much you enjoy this job is going to depend on your attitude going in. And if you really hate medicine, you can leave and do management consultancy instead. There's always alternatives. But best of luck to everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Picton. That was really helpful. So for tomorrow, we have our surgery for final series from Mind the Bleep on urology. So really high yield stuff for your finals. And then this Thursday, we have the final year medicine series on renal medicine. And do join the foundation groups on Facebook by Mind the Bleep. And I think, Charlie, we might see you for other teaching sessions, right, in Mind the Bleep, because Dr. Picton is also part of Mind the Bleep. So keep an eye on the teaching that he organizes as well in the future. And if there are any questions, just send it to our generic mailbox, finalyear@mindthebleep.com, and just ask us anything, and I will direct the questions to Dr. Picton. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you. Good night.